So I want to fast forward to today, and I want to do that by showing you what Pete Hegseth said the morning after the strike on his former place of employment, the Fox and Friends morning program on Fox News.
That was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
So Pete Hegseth confirming a central piece of the Washington Post reporting, quote, I watched it live. We knew who they were. We knew what they represented, says who they are, designated by the United States. So we've established him in the room. Post has reported it. 11 people were on the call. 2 people with direct knowledge speak to the Post. Pete Hegseth on live TV corroborates it. So I found this amazing. This is the White House spokeswoman at her briefing today.
To be clear, does the administration deny that that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes.
To clarify, Admiral Bradley was the one who gave that order for a second strike.
And he was well within his authority to do so.
Did Admiral Bradley order that second strike because there were still survivors after the initial strike?
Again, as I read for you, Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law. He directed the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat of narco-terrorists to the United States was completely eliminated.
General Hertling, do you know Admiral Bradley?
I do not, Claire, but I do know his position in the military right now. I don't know him personally. But it kind of appears like he just got thrown under the bus. And this kind of information is critical. I did not hear that press conference today, but it's critical because if there is, and there should be, an inquiry by the United States Congress, this is going to turn into a very interesting inquiry, not only from what the Secretary of Defense says, but what from the SEAL team leader says, the individuals who reportedly gave the information to the Washington Post, the lawyers, the Southcom commander, and anybody else that was involved. And if it was an open line and there were no written orders, but it was a verbal order by anyone, it will more than likely be recorded just like the strike was recorded. And by the way, this probably, in my view, I don't know this for certain, but I'm going to use a little conjecture here. If they were firing something from an island in the Caribbean, this was not a drone strike. This was more than likely some type of artillery piece or a rocket. It was laser guided. That's what it appeared to look like from the strike to me. If it's laser guided, you have to keep the pilot with the laser on the target until the round hits. So there are going to be films of exactly what happened. So as Carolyn Levitt tries to explain in a non-military way exactly what happened, it appears like she's only digging a deeper hole.
Yeah, I mean, Admiral Baumgartner, Caroline Levitt is saying Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority in the law. His authority in the law is inconsistent with striking survivors from an initial strike. And again, I just want to tell everyone what the Post has reported happened. A missile screamed off the Trinidad coast, striking the vessel and igniting a blaze from bow to stern. For minutes, commanders watched the boat burning on a live drone feed, which was recorded. We can go back and look at that if there's a real investigation. I know that's an if. As the smoke cleared, they got a jolt. 2 survivors were clinging to the smoldering wreck. That appears inconsistent with what Caroline Levitt said today. Quote, as I read for you, Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority in the law. It would seem that if the system is still working, that someone would have sought guidance or would have wanted to know what to do. The White House throwing Admiral Bradley under the bus seems totally inconsistent with Pete Hegseth's appearance on Fox News the morning after the operation, which, again, I'll quote that for you. Quote, I watched it live. We knew who was in the boat and what they represented. That is Tren de Aragua, designated by the United States for trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
Well, I would say here several things are consistent, and the consistency being that it isn't consistent with reality. So when you start here, first of all, there were supposedly 11 people on this vessel. No one that's experienced in this area would think that this is a major shipment of cocaine to the United States with 11 people on the vessel. Entirely inconsistent. Second, the drug that's
because they leave all that room for drugs, right? If they're running drugs, they're never more than two people. Right. Explain that.
Yes, yeah. If you're running drugs, especially a major load of drugs, you want room for cargo. You're not going to take it up with extra people. Also, you're concerned about security. The more people you have on that boat means the more families that might know about that boat going someplace, the more possibility for leaks. You want as few people on that boat as possible and as much drugs on the boat as possible. 11 people is just not consistent with carrying a major load of cocaine. The other part of it is to pretend that this is the drug that is causing overdoses in the United States. The drug that is killing people in the United States is fentanyl. Fentanyl does not come from South America. There's no fentanyl in that boat, despite the statements that the administration made in October saying there was fentanyl seen. Fentanyl is very small in small quantities, and it just is not coming from South America. Everybody in the business knows that. So what you're seeing is a consistent deviation from the facts and reworking of the facts, which is very troubling. And it kind of leads to the fact that this whole operation is not lawful. And you notice that the White House was using within his authority. So you can say somebody has authority if you tell them they can go do something. That doesn't mean that it's lawful or that he's within the bounds of the law. So that I think they were careful to say those things. So here, first of all, we should keep in sight that the original strike itself doesn't appear to be lawful. There isn't any legal basis for it in international law. Mm-hmm. Calling somebody a terrorist or a foreign terrorist organization is not fairy dust that immediately you sprinkle on them and they're now a legitimate target to go out and kill them every time you find them. That's not the way international or domestic law works. It simply is not. I think the other thing that's kind of consistent and troubling here is we've seen our brave professional military that wants to do the right thing, wants to follow the law, wants to be the good guys in the world, dangling here for months. We don't know what this real legal justification is other than kind of a trust me, it's legal. I call these people terrorists so we can kill them kind of thing. That's not the way the law works, and our military shouldn't be sitting out there wondering whether the orders they're being given are lawful or not. You go out there, if they're lawful, prove it. Man up, prove it, put your cards on the table, show it, show people your evidence, let them pick it apart. And that's how you really support your troops, is by giving them a legal, lawful mission and standing behind it and putting yourself on the line if you have to.
Admiral, let me ask you an uncomfortable question. If you're in the military, what should you do if you now have questions from the video urging them not to follow illegal orders, and from the Washington Post reporting, making clear that a second strike, that if it happened the way the Post says it happened, the way Pete Hegseth's comments the next morning are not inconsistent with it happening, the way the White House now seems to be throwing a member of the military under the bus is not inconsistent with it happening. What should you do?
Well, I think the Department of Defense Law of War Manual is pretty clear on this. They have a section about what to do in case you're given a clearly unlawful order. And the exact example that's given in that manual is an order to fire on shipwrecked people clinging for survival in the water. That is the example they give of what is a clearly unlawful order. So I think the Department of Defense has answered that themselves.
The growing scandal about an alleged war crime that is engulfing the Trump administration. It involves a military airstrike back in September, the first in what Trump officials claim is a campaign targeting suspected drug smugglers in the Caribbean. The Washington Post reports that as officials watched the boat on a drone feed, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth gave the order, kill them all, according to two people with direct knowledge of the operation. But after the smoke cleared from the missile strike, there was a shock. 2 survivors were clinging to the smoldering wreck. The Post reports that, quote, the Special Operations Commander ordered a second strike to comply with Hegseth's instructions. The 2 men were blown apart in the water, 2 people familiar with the matter said. Now, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are saying that if the Washington Post's reporting is true, the strike is illegal.
Obviously, if that occurred, that would be very serious, and I agree that would be an illegal act.
Going after survivors in the water, that is clearly not lawful.
If that reporting is true, it's a clear violation of the DOD's own laws of war. And so this rises to the level of a war crime.
If it was as if the article said, that is a violation of the law of war. When people want to surrender, you don't kill them.
In fact, both American and international law would suggest that this was, in fact, an illegal strike. The Pentagon's own manual for the laws of war says, quote, persons who have been incapacitated by wounds, sickness, or shipwreck are in a helpless state, and it would be dishonorable and inhumane to make them the object of attack. And both the Senate and House Armed Services Committees say that they will investigate this matter. And while Trump now says that he backs Hegseth, he was more equivocal on Sunday when asked about it. Take a listen.
Can you talk a little bit about the strikes and the controversy around Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth?
I don't know anything about it. He said he did not say that, and I believe him 100%.
You don't know if there was
You're talking about the 2 men?
The second strike to kill the 2 men.
No, he said he didn't do it.
If there were a second strike that killed wounded people wounded in the first strike, are you
well,
thinking
number one,
that
I
would be
don't.
legal?
Yeah. Number one, I don't know that happened. And Pete said he did not want them. He didn't even know what people were talking about. So we'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted that. Not a second strike.
Pete Hegseth and the Pentagon deny the accusations and maintain that these actions were lawful. In total, the administration has conducted at least 21 strikes that have caused 83 fatalities. From the outset, the legality of all of these actions has been hotly debated. This is all the latest in a string of controversies surrounding Pete Hegseth, including the accidental sharing of classified information in the so-called Signalgate incident from March. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Tom Nichols, writer with The Atlantic and professor emeritus of the National Security Affairs at the U.S. Naval War College. His latest article is titled, Pete Hegseth Needs to Go Now. Also with me tonight is Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor and legal correspondent for Slate. She's also an MS Now law and politics analyst. Tom, let's start with you. Given your experience with the laws of war, what is your reaction to this extraordinary story?
Well, first they said it didn't happen, and now they're saying it's happened and it's legal and lawful. The problem is that there is no scenario under which you can fire and kill, fire at and kill people that are helpless in the water and make it legal. There just isn't. I mean, this is, they've really chosen to plant the flag here on something that isn't even ambiguous. There are a lot of cases. The United States has been involved in a lot of difficult places in the world, like Somalia, the Battle of Mogadishu, Afghanistan, Iraq. This one isn't even in the same ballpark. These are shipwrecked people who have been rendered incapable of combat. Not that they were capable of it in the first place. I mean, there's no argument that these boats have ever shot at us. We just don't like what they're doing, and we assume that they have drugs on them, and so we can just blow them up. But, the idea that you can then go in and say, you know what, we're just going to execute the last survivors. We actually prosecuted people after World War II for doing that exact same thing. Yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the death by firing squad of a Nazi U-boat commander who was convicted of doing exactly what Hegseth is accused of ordering here.
So, Dahlia, Tom makes very clear why this particular incident is so concerning, but I would just note that legally these strikes have always been on thin ice, and you've discussed this a fair amount on your Amicus podcast and in your writing. What's your take on this? What makes this so wobbly and uneven in terms of its legality?
I mean, I think Tom makes exactly the point. This is a kind of double-decker sandwich of illegality because it's not even clear that we're in anything resembling a war. That's been a question from the jump. Whatever it is that we're doing in the Caribbean, it's not clear by any metric that it's legal, and that these were extrajudicial killings long before this weekend's reporting happened. And so I think it's really important to understand we are now debating, in some sense, the coda to that story, Melissa, which is, and then they straight up assassinated people who were clinging to the hull of the boat. But whether there's any authority under any law that allows us to just go shooting at boats because we're saying that we're in a war on drugs and that the president gets to decide who is carrying drugs and how they are executed, right? This is the administration claiming to be judge and jury and assassin all in one go. So long before we got to a conversation about, as Tom just said, whether somebody who is essentially shipwrecked can be assassinated, we have to have the conversation we actually haven't had for several months now about whether we can even call this a war.
Well, Tom, I want you to take a listen to Karoline Leavitt in her White House press briefing today, because she is doubling down that these were necessary actions and there is no wrongdoing here. Take a listen.
The strike conducted on September 2nd was conducted in self-defense to protect Americans in vital United States interests.
All right, Tom, still a lawyer here. I know the standard for self-defense. Is this even plausible? These are two suspected smugglers in a small boat, and this is an act of self-defense? Say more or less.
I don't think we should spend a whole lot of time taking too seriously anything Karoline Leavitt says, because that's what Karoline Leavitt does. This isn't the idea that this is self-defense. Again, is laughable. You would have to argue that somehow our forces were in danger and returned fire. People forget we interdict drug boats all the time. The Coast Guard has been doing this for decades, and the idea that there's only one way that we know how to do this, and that is to just fix them with a satellite and then blow them to smithereens, is ridiculous. It's because, again, it's something we actually know how to do. And so the claim of self-defense is she was probably given talking points that stretch this idea that, well, drugs are bad and Americans die, and therefore we have to preemptively stop the drugs that are going to kill Americans, and that makes it self-defense. That is such a stretch of self-defense that it would get laughed out of any court internationally or domestically because of it just removes so many steps. But at this point, what can they do? Of course, they're going to say whatever they need to say, that they're acting legally. This whole thing should never, Dahlia is absolutely right. This whole thing should never have gotten off the ground, at least not without some congressional approval, clear statement of what we're intending to do, why we're doing it, when we'll know that we're done. And instead, it's the president saying, I'm just going to flex muscle and kill people and prove that the military will do whatever I tell them to do. And so, of course, you're going to get statements coming out of the White House that says the president's always right, because that's her job.
Well, Dahlia, it's not just coming from the White House. Over at the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth also doesn't seem to be taking these accusations very seriously. Over the weekend, he posted this. A meme of Franklin the Turtle bombing boats. What's your reaction to this, Dahlia? I mean, is anybody taking this seriously anywhere?
I mean, look, I think it's not an unsmart play to just start with trolling, right? Trolling always wins. And when you post a trivial meme, it's generally a good deflection. Maybe the bigger question, Melissa, is that this is sticking to Pete Hegseth. Like, it's not funny. It's not registering as comedy or owning the libs. I think probably with a little hindsight, making this a joke was an error even for him, because this is across, as you said, ideological lines now. We are hearing from members of the Congress that if this is true, this is a war crime. And the idea that this is the thing that's going to stick is its own segment, right? Like, so many things are allowed to slide, but it is entirely possible that while Pete Hegseth didn't initially think this was anything beyond a punchline, the country disagrees. And I think I would maybe just add this. Tom just said, and it's really important to emphasize, we executed people in 1945 for doing precisely this, killing folks who were on a boat that didn't need to be killed, and then saying I was just following orders. Neither of those presumptions are a question as a matter of law. So the idea that Pete Hegseth, sent out a turtle tells you that he thinks he's bulletproof, and he might be wrong.
Joining us, MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell, editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy and host of FP Live, Ravi Agrawal, and retired four-star general and MS Now military analyst General Barry McCaffrey. Interesting to see so many Republican lawmakers today, Michael, saying that they're concerned and they need more answers out of the Pentagon.
Yeah, Katie, and notably, it's the bipartisan lawmakers, including those Republicans, from a pair of key committees, both the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, the top Republican and Democrat on both of those panels, coming out with statements after that Washington Post story published, saying they are demanding oversight of what had happened in the Caribbean. I want to read to you some of their statements because I think that they really are powerful. First, for the House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mike Rogers and Ranking Member Adam Smith, they said the committee is committed to providing rigorous oversight of the Department of Defense's military operations in the Caribbean. Senator Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Senator Jack Reed, he's the ranking member of that panel, issuing a similar statement saying, quote, the committee is aware of the recent reports regarding the follow-on strikes on suspected narcotics vehicles. They say the committee has directed inquiries to the department and we will be conducting vigorous oversight to determine the facts related to the circumstance. So, Katie, leaving no question there that these four key lawmakers, again, they are in charge of the committee that oversees the armed services, are very concerned by these reports of those boat strikes, and they are efforting more information and investigations right now.
So what authority do they have to get more information? I mean, if they ask the Pentagon for more information, are they going to get it? Michael.
Oh, right. Well, these committees, they have subpoena power for the majority of the committees, and they can subpoena information. They can threaten to bring some of these officials in front of the panels to ask them questions under oath. They could write letters requesting more information. There are a lot of different avenues that these panels can take. Members of Congress are returning back into the Capitol today after taking that Thanksgiving recess off, and we know that this report came out during that Thanksgiving recess. So our team will be asking these four members of Congress and others what avenues they can take and what recourse there is to find answers. Because it's not just these four, it's those members you played in the introduction. There's a lot of concern on both sides of the aisle, and these panels are committing to finding the information.
General McCaffrey, if they wanted more information, what sort of logs does the Pentagon have? Verbal logs, audio logs, recordings? Would there be a verbal or a log of Pete Hegseth's verbal order to kill everybody? What information could they access?
Well, 100% for sure, there is a record of who said what when. We have to assume there will be an investigation, hopefully in the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Roger Wicker and Jack Reed, to get at the bottom of this. But look, the bottom line is the alleged incident of killing the last two survivors was quite clearly an illegal order. Quite clearly a war crime if it occurred the way we're being told. That admiral who accepted the verbal order from Secretary Hegseth will also be held responsible for passing it on. So they've got to get to the bottom of this. We simply can't have the equivalent of a Nazi submarine in World War II machine gunning the survivors of a torpedoed ship. That's the equivalent statement. But Katie, the big problem is, where is Congress, Article 1, use of force? What are we trying to achieve in Venezuela? It's clearly not a counter-drug operation. There's 15,000 of the most sophisticated troops and naval vessels and aircraft and the U.S. inventory down there, entirely unsuited for anything except destroying an enemy armed force. So Congress must get involved. This is completely out of control.
Here is Caroline Leavitt, a little bit, just a moment ago, in fact, at the White House briefing, talking about this reporting and the strikes.
President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. And I would just add one more point to remind the American public why these lethal strikes are taking place. Because this administration has designated these narco-terrorists as foreign terrorist organizations. The president has a right to take them out if they are threatening the United States of America and if they are bringing illegal narcotics that are killing our citizens at a record rate, which is what they are doing.
So General, I know we just talked about this, but again, I just want to go over it one more time. Can you help me understand the line? If they are striking a drug boat and the strike does not kill everybody, which, you know, it's a lethal strike, so surprising it would not kill everybody, but it does not kill everybody, why is it then crossing a line to continue on with a second strike?
Well, look, if it was a ground combat situation, it'd be far more complicated. And there is no requirement for imminent threat in these close combat situations. For example, we strike retreating enemy forces, or we strike their logistics far behind the line. But in the case of a naval engagement, even if you assume that there is an appropriate legal mechanism citing these people as terrorist states and therefore allowing the armed forces instead of the Coast Guard and the DEA to deal with them, even if you buy that, once at sea, they're helpless, they're assumed to be no threat, they have submitted, then it's quite directly in the DOD manual that you can't go on to kill them, which makes sense. And why wouldn't a helicopter have gone in and picked them up and had them as prisoners and interrogated them as a follow-on? So I think what has happened is the armed forces figured this out, and they're no longer accepting this kind of directive from the Secretary of Defense, who should be investigated. And if he did give a verbal order to that effect, I would suggest the Senate should take him out of office.
So, Ravi, how is this reverberating beyond the borders of the United States? There's obviously some deep discomfort and some concern in Washington. Certainly, a lot of deep discomfort and concern amongst the American public. What about outside of this?
Oh, there's even more discomfort abroad. I mean, the United Kingdom has reportedly stopped sharing some intelligence with the United States. Remember, they're real allies on the Five Eyes alliance. And the United Kingdom has, partly because of the Commonwealth and other countries that sort of it governs, it gets a lot of intelligence across the Caribbean. The Netherlands also reportedly is uncomfortable sharing intel around the region with the United States, if it thinks, as it does, that these strikes could well be illegal, or at the very least, the United States has not been sharing enough information about how these people might be narco-terrorists, what kind of imminent threat they pose to the United States, and why indeed this is a focus at all. And if you zoom out a little bit more, I think we shouldn't forget, amid this very important issue, that with this huge array of U.S. force outside the coast of Venezuela, as much as a third of the U.S. Navy, if the United States is pushing for regime change in Venezuela, which could lead to all kinds of instability in Venezuela and across the region, of course, that would have huge repercussions around the region, for the world, but also spare thought for Trump's own supporters who do not understand the consistency here, how this adds up to a foreign policy in the administration that has really, so far, been about not getting entangled in foreign affairs, not focusing mostly on peace agreements rather than starting new wars. How this fits into that is very confusing.
I think there would be some understanding if there was a strategy to stop illegal drugs from coming into this country, broadly speaking, but they have not, beyond just saying they're narco-terrorists, they haven't really shown why this would stop the flow of drugs into this country. On that same point, make a real dent in the flow of drugs. On that same point, the president is also saying he's going to pardon a narco-terrorist, somebody convicted of drug trafficking here in the United States. The former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, convicted and sentenced to 45 years in jail for trafficking, dozens of tons of cocaine into the United States over many, many years, and allowing Honduras to be a conduit for that drug trafficking, even accused of working with El Chapo. I don't understand how, on the one hand, the administration is striking boats, accusing them of being narco-terrorists, and on the other, pardoning this man.
Neither do I. It just doesn't add up. The contradictions keep adding up. In fact, look, and Venezuela also isn't a huge supplier of drugs into the United States. There are other countries you could look at, you could focus at. There is more evidence you could turn up. And of course, this call to pardon the former Honduran president makes no sense at all. But I think, again, if you zoom out here, it seems that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has long talked about regime change in Venezuela and also in Cuba, of course, that this faction within the White House might be winning out so far in trying to convince the president to take action, even though that goes quite against all of the things Trump has talked about on the campaign trail while in office. A lot of the MAGA support base does not want foreign entanglements for the United States. So it'll be very interesting to see whether Trump actually goes for the kill here. But the other thing is that in putting so much of the naval forces off the coast of Venezuela, the United States may have worked itself into a corner here, because if you back off now without actually taking action, where that leaves Maduro is in a much stronger position where he's able to tell his people that he stood up to the full might of the United States, the most powerful country in the world. And so there's a real dilemma now that confronts Trump, and it'll be very interesting to see how he games that out.
Joining us now, Jake Sherman, co-founder of Punchbowl News and an MS Now political contributor. Mark McKinnon, former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain and creator of The Circus. Basil Smikle is a Democratic strategist, former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, and an MS Now political analyst. All right, Basil, Republicans have dubbed Afton Ben, who is that candidate, the AOC of Tennessee. And in fact, AOC, along with former Vice President Al Gore, are going to do a tele-rally for her. But realistically, does she stand a chance?
Yeah, this is a tough district. You said plus 22. It's ranged from plus 19, plus 22 in Republican favor. What I think is going for her, and the polling has suggested that she's ahead in a couple of points. What's going for her is that, number one, that affordability argument, I think, can work. It's a mix of urban and rural communities, and the urban aspects of that community have large percentage of African-American voters, but also parts of Nashville, which has experienced, from what I read over the last couple of months, some of the most intense gentrification of any city in the country. So if that pattern holds, what we saw in New York and other places, New York's an outlier, no question about it. But if we see some of that pattern holding, where you have a lot of younger voters who are doing well financially but concerned about affordability, and have that translate to what's happening in the rural communities as well because of Trump policies, she's got as great a shot as any at being able to win that seat.
So, Mark, President Trump and House Speaker Mike Johnson, meantime, are holding a tele-rally for the Republican candidate, Matt Van Epps, tonight. Is the fact that we're even talking about the possibility of a Democratic win that we have these folks coming out for a Republican enough of a warning sign for Republicans almost no matter what happens tonight, even if she keeps it close?
You took the words out of my mouth, Chris. I was just going to say the very fact that we're talking about this race at all is already a win for Democrats. I mean, this seat is not only in a deep red state, but it was carved up specifically to be a seat that Republicans wouldn't even have to contest. So it's very clear that it's sending a message that Republicans, no matter what districts they live in or represent, are going to be in competitive races. And I think the message that this is sending is it not only encourages the National Democrats, but it also discourages Republicans. Any Republicans who are out there in what they thought were safe Trump districts are going to be looking over their shoulder at this and saying, well, now, wait a minute, if that race is competitive, look at mine. I only won mine by 14. Does that mean I'm in trouble? So I think it sends a broad message across the country to both Democrats and Republicans that this is a different kind of race than they thought it would be 6 months ago.
Well, here's something interesting, Jake. Another House seat is on the line for an already narrow Republican majority because a staunch Trump ally in Texas is announcing he won't seek re-election next year. I mean, he is endorsing his twin brother, and frankly, in photos, I can't tell them apart. But what does this tell us about the mood inside the Republican Party?
Well, people hate Congress right now. I mean, it is a wretched place to be serving right now. The institution is doing very little. The House is doing very little. The Senate's doing very little. People are fighting. They're trying to censure each other. It's a pretty wretched and unpleasant place to serve. But let me just drill in a little bit more on Tennessee, because Troy Nehls, who announced he's going to retire, that's a red seat. That is a seat that Republicans are going to win absent some sort of event that we don't see, that we can't foresee at this point, and that'll be next November. If Republicans lose this seat, it will be a level 5 emergency for the GOP. Like, let's be abundantly clear about that.
5 out of 5 or 5 out of 10?
I haven't found 5 out of 3, perhaps. I think that I haven't found a Republican or a Democrat who thinks Democrats are going to win. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have predictive abilities. But if you run this race 100 times, I think, Republicans win 99.9% of the time. But again, in a district, special elections are weird. So let me caveat it with that. Turnout's weird. The whole thing is weird. But if you can't win a district that Trump won by 22, it tells you a few things. It tells you that enthusiasm is in the toilet. It tells you that Republicans are going to struggle in places like this when Trump isn't on the ballot. This is a quarter. If they win by 5 points, the Republicans, that is a quarter of what they should be winning by. That is a massive, massive problem. I mean, you had Republicans, House Republicans a couple months ago talking about the durable Republican majority, a Republican majority that could withstand anything. And now you can't even win a red seat in Tennessee by more than 5 points. It will be catastrophic. And I will say, Democrats are picking up 2 more seats in the coming months in Texas and in New Jersey. This majority could flip if somebody else resigns, if there's, God forbid, a death, an illness. I mean, we are at the point where Republicans' majority is no longer completely secure.
Okay. There is also, meantime, Mark, new reporting from Politico on the Florida governor's race where Byron Donalds, who's Trump's pick to replace Ron DeSantis, faces a Republican pile-on. Politico says instead of the field collapsing because of the endorsement, Donalds is drawing in new challengers who have sharper attacks. It includes allies of the term-limited DeSantis. What might Florida show us if President Trump is losing his kingmaker status?
Well, I think that's what it's already shown. I mean, Donalds is by far and away Trump's favorite, has been for a long time, has his imprimatur clearly stamped on that race. So the fact that other Republicans are even willing to look at it just suggests that whatever stranglehold Donald Trump has on the Republican Party is loosening. He's no longer, he's no longer going to be running for president next time around. So he's for all practical purposes a lame duck And that political power is going to do nothing from here on out but wane. And Florida is a very clear example of just how that's happening.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me because there is the question of perception versus reality in the race. Like Byron Donalds, if you look at it on paper, not only does he have Trump's endorsement, he has other key endorsements. He's got millions of dollars in the bank. So again, a prohibitive favorite. But does it tell us something already just by virtue of the fact that you have other people saying, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot?
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And I think Mark's on point with this, that you have people who are far more willing to challenge Trump policies, and the stranglehold that he has on the party than you were before. I don't know that that's a Marjorie Taylor Greene impetus. I don't know. Maybe it preceded that. But the fact that we're even talking about this, the fact that that independents are starting to turn away from Donald Trump because of his policies, that Latino voters, who many of whom may have supported Donald Trump in 2024, are now, concerned about immigration and ICE, for example, that it's not just the fact that he's not on the ballot, but that the policies are not popular. And if you go back to even Speaker Johnson's podcast interview the other day, how exasperated he seemed that, he can't hold his party together. And for the most part, there are members calling him, and he's trying to to stop their mental breakdowns. That suggests to me that candidates running with Donald Trump don't have anything to go to their constituents to say that he's done or that he's allowed them to do. So why not challenge the status quo if there's no penalty to doing so?
And Jake, this is all coming as that new Gallup poll showed President Trump's approval rating 36%. That's the lowest of his second term so far. And that same poll found he's losing support throughout parties, including down 7 points among Republican voters compared to last month. So if you want to talk about the exasperation of Speaker Johnson, is the more widespread exasperation within his caucus?
Yeah, and if you look at the congressional ratings, those also are mirrored in how people view Congress, including Republicans. Since last year, Republican support of Republicans has been cut in half. Republican support of this Republican Congress. And when you tie yourself, as House Republicans and most Senate Republicans have, to President Trump in this case, then your popularity is going to ride along his. And that ship has sailed. I mean, there's nothing that House Republicans could or Senate Republicans could do at this point. I mean, they are inextricably tied to the president. They have executed on his agenda. They stick up for him through thick and thin. He has the party that he wants. He has a party that's unflinchingly loyal to him, and we'll have to see how that works out in less than a year when voters head to the ballot.
Jake Sherman, Mark McKinnon, Basil Smikle, gentlemen, thank you.